and there's nothing in your way, so of course you can move. And then as I move, no build up, no nothing. I mean, it feels like you're after sometimes you're just like, well, why is your hand still attached to me? And the person just goes up. You just don't care that they exist anymore. And then usually, if it goes quite nicely, the other person is very perplexed because they don't feel any moment where they can seize and kind of resist you, and they just get taken up.
So, but maybe, why don't we touch a little bit more on that kind of like absence of force feeling? I mean, Mike, maybe you can mention about this. What do you feel when you do really any of the Aunkai exercises and you get it right? I mean,
When I get
how
it
would you
right,
describe it? Yeah, when you get it right.
when I actually, the funny thing is like before I even do anything, if I have everything set up correctly, I already know it's gonna work because you already feel the pressure go away, and there's nothing in your way, so of course you can move. And then as I move, no build up, no nothing. I mean, it feels like you're after sometimes you're just like, well, why is your hand still attached to me? And the person just goes up. You just don't care that they exist anymore. And then usually, if it goes quite nicely, the other person is very perplexed because they don't feel any moment where they can seize and kind of resist you, and they just get taken up. And they're off balance. And they're like, what did you just do? I think that pretty much describes how it feels to me. I mean, I don't feel any pressure going up. I don't feel anything build up in my feet. I don't feel anything build up at the contact point, unless I fuck up. What that happens too. But yeah,
What about even for like a strike? Like if you're
strike,
doing a punch or a kick, what do you feel on that moment of impact?
nothing. I mean, it just keeps. I mean, if Rob has talked about a little bit of difference between a ski and a punch, so they're different things. So you'll feel different things if you're practicing like a boxing, more boxing style punch. Then you will feel kind of like the hard impact that happens at your knuckles, and you kind of want that. For ski, when you strike and when you make contact with, I don't feel like this moment of impact. It just keeps going through, and then I think, and that to me is my barometer of how well I was able to perform in that moment. If I the more impact, or not impact, but it's like the more feedback I feel through my body, or the more especially with your when you're sending in the phase that you send out your limb, if you feel anything that is kind of like I don't want to say it's tension, but you will feel this. There's a feedback even when you're sending something out. Then usually that tells me that probably wasn't as good as it could have been.
Well, I mean that means more of it's going back into you.
Yeah, yeah,
It's not nearly
yeah,
as clean,
yeah,
So it's kind of like if you hit a cue ball or a cue ball hitting another ball, if it bounces backwards, then not all the energy transferred in. Those what is it, the cat's cradle type thing? If they have that,
yeah.
then you know, or
I
if it
mean,
has that and it hits away, then obviously it's amount of that energy is going back into the ball that's initiating it.
Arc talks about, like, especially in class where you're doing your punching drills, it's like touch, 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 and then even when you send it out further, I guess, uh, it doesn't change. The feeling doesn't change. If I move a little bit faster, or if I try to project a little bit farther, that feeling of, oh, I'm just touching whatever the target is. There's no difference. There should be no difference in your body, and it doesn't. I don't feel the difference when I do it right. So I think that was what you want to take as your goal, I think.
For what it's worth, what I've found even in boxing, I think there's a lot of misconceptions, between mainly because I think like there's not most people don't look into boxing enough, or they haven't actually trained with a pro, or even if they train with a pro, that pro doesn't teach very well, you know. But one thing that I noticed was, say, like when they shadow box, and when like Anuj would be like, or my trainer would be like, when you punch, it's like, I want more knuckles. It's like, I want you to touch the knuckles to the pad, just touch. And then what I realized was, like, if I just touched the knuckles, I'm not applying any force, but because my body is connected, for a boxing jab, which by the way is different from a thrust, from a weapons-based mechanic type of thrust, for just a surface level distinction. A boxing, a jab, a hook, right, or your cross is going to be external rotation of the shoulder. That's just a surface level distinction, by the way. So for a tsuki or a thrust, generally speaking, you know, they're going from, you have la, what was it, la, na, ja, or something like this, but it's as more akin with an uppercut, which is an internal rotation this way. Even though your fist is turning like this, the actual motion of the elbow staying down and you staying behind the body as it comes out, because you want your center mass, your tanden or whatever, behind this elbow basically. And so that's going to be an internal rotation. So, okay, so basically to boil it down, you know, punches, generally speaking, are going to be external rotation for the most part, and then thrusting type applications are internal rotation. But either way, what I noticed was that even for the boxing, where you're using this kind of like external rotation, when he just touches the pad, just touches, he's not applying any force, I can feel the solidity of his body and his structure. Okay, so it's not like, oh, he's like using power or anything like that. No, because his body is conditioned. And so even just the slightest touch, you know, because his body is conditioned and stiffened to some degree, even though he's relaxed, there's not much loss of, I guess you could say, power in between the ground and his fist, which is what you want. And that's from a boxing perspective. And then, so that also carries over to what Ark talks about, where he's like, even when you do tsuki, you just want to be able to touch the surface. So if your alignment isn't correct and you're just still trying to like put more force or even like put more down force, et cetera, like you have no business trying to like try and like punch past that target because your alignment is off, or your alignment as in your body cohesiveness is off.